I had another request to tape a piece on the guarantees of the indexed life products. And what we've seen over the past several years is a lot of great plans are put into someone's home, or prospective programs are shown to a client, and it's very difficult to get back to the client or have the client continue the interest that they had initially. A lot of times it's because when they look at the illustrations on an IUL product, the guarantees do not go out very far, and it's very typical to find someone who may have max funded a life contract with several $100,000 to go 29, 30 years down the road and see zeros on the contractual guarantees. And people who are inexperienced with index products, or know what's happening, or know what those illustrative numbers are actually representing, they'll mislead the client into thinking that it's a terrible investment, it's way too risky, and it has no guarantees. Well, we have to make sure that whenever we show a client an illustration, we spend the allotted time necessary on the guaranteed column to have a good understanding of what those numbers mean and what's happening in that particular illustration. And this, unfortunately, is not explained a lot of times to prospective clients, and they get the wrong idea about the program. When you look down at a guaranteed illustration on an IUL product and you see zeros after 28 or 29 years, you need to inform the client the chain of events that are happening to make that illustration look the way it is. Now, we currently have a piece in compliance with Fidelity and Guarantee, and we're trying to get the compliance department to approve it. It's just an explanation of the contractual guarantees, and it's going to be a leave behind piece. And it's important that a client knows what happens on the left side of that illustration, and this does a pretty good job in laying it out. Now remember, the first thing that you have to assume on the left side of the illustration is that maximum mortality, the maximum cost of insurance to the current table being used in the illustration, which is a 2001 CSO, the Commissioner's Standard Ordinary Mortality Table, that maximum mortality means there is no discount, as there shows up on the right side of the illustration, for the cost of insurance. It's max cost of insurance. There's no class action suits here. A lot of the mutual companies are not paying the dividends or reducing their dividends. Something has happened to trigger max mortality with no discount for the entire length of that guaranteed illustration. So for 28 or 29 years, max mortality. The second thing we assume in that illustration is that if we're in the index strategy, that stock market for 29 years has never started in the beginning of the year and ended higher at the end of the year. It either remained exactly the same or the market went down. So we're looking at a stock market that either plummeted for 29 consecutive years, or we had a few years where it was a break even, but for the rest of the years it went down. So to think about that, it's an impossibility, and the actuarial impossibility, when studies are done, it proves that. You'll see that it's literally impossible for the stock market to go down 29 consecutive years. That's what we're assuming in the illustration. The other thing we're assuming is that we never make a switch from the index strategy to the fixed account and take a more conservative approach to the compounding of money and the cash values. And finally, on top of all this, with a declining market, no switching, max mortality, the illustration shows a client making payment after payment, year after year, and just writing the checks regardless of what they're facing. And when you take that whole situation together and take a look at it, you see the impossibility of the guaranteed illustration. Now we know that, and we also know that in order to get the right side of the illustration to take place, we have to use the reserves from the interest rate on the bonds to buy the call options. So obviously the left side is showing no guarantees other than guarantee of principal to allow the interest rate on the bonds to go over to the left side or the right side of the illustration and buy the options. In conclusion, when you show a person an illustration, be sure you spend the amount of time that needed on the explanation of the guaranteed illustration, and go over it as many times as you have to until that client looks at you and says, "Oh, I understand that. Well, that's impossible. That'll never happen," or "I'd make changes," or "Yes." Now you know you have a client who understands the guaranteed illustration, and it's okay to move on and to start talking about other provisions of the product.